First, Trump threw tariffs like they were grenades. Then he declared economic war with 125%, 145%, even threatening 400% tariffs on Chinese goods. He wanted to cripple China's economy, break their back, and force them to the negotiation table like it was 2018 all over again. But this time, the dragon didn't just flinch. It smiled. And then, it pulled the one trigger no one in Washington thought Beijing would dare touch. In just a matter of days, the United States found itself confronting a storm it never saw coming. Captured Chinese fighters in Ukraine's war zone. A Chinese state-owned company expanding its control over a port sitting dangerously close to a U.S. naval hub in Israel. And a brewing currency war that's quietly dragging global markets into chaos. This isn't just retaliation, it's revenge, strategic, brutal, and perfectly timed. So what exactly is China doing to crush Trump's tariff war? What is the real trigger they have pulled that's sending shockwaves across continents? And more importantly, why could this moment mark the start of a far more dangerous trade war than the world has ever seen? In this video, let's find out. It appears China is ready to do everything it can at every frontier to send a message to Trump that it's ready to fight. Therefore, while Trump's tariff wars stole global headlines and rattled markets, an event exploded out of Eastern Europe that could radically reshape the US-China dynamics. On a quiet April morning, Ukraine confirmed that 2 Chinese nationals had been captured fighting for Russia in the Donbas region, the epicenter of the bloodiest trench warfare since World War I. Let that sink in. Beijing, the same Beijing that preaches peace, promotes dialogue and insists it's neutral in the Ukraine conflict, had Chinese boots on the ground. In a war it claimed to have nothing to do with. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky was unambiguous. These weren't tourists who took a wrong turn near Bakhmut. These were armed combatants, embedded in Russian units, fighting and possibly dying for Putin's cause. Beijing's reaction: not denial, not clarification, just outrage. The Chinese Foreign Ministry called Ukraine's claim a rumor, urged Kyiv to avoid irresponsible rhetoric, and said it was still verifying the situation. But verifying what, exactly? The passports? The uniforms? Or the fact that they had been caught red-handed on the front lines of a war that China was supposedly trying to help end? The bigger question isn't about these 2 soldiers, it's what they represent. Because if Chinese nationals are being deployed, whether formally enlisted, trained in China, or funneled through unofficial paramilitary channels, then China's entire position as a neutral mediator collapses. What we are looking at is something else entirely. A covert alliance solidifying itself on the battlefield. And the US knows it. In a leaked letter to Secretary of State Marco Rubio, members of the US House Select Committee on China made their position clear. China is no longer a neutral party. They argued that Russia could not have hired Chinese mercenaries without tacit approval from Beijing. This isn't just about rogue actors or freelance fighters. It's about a sanctioned presence, a shadow war. That shadow grew darker still when intelligence officials confirmed that as many as 155 Chinese nationals are believed to be embedded within Russian units. Some may be ex-military, some could be fresh recruits. But all, according to Zelensky's intelligence network, are operating within Russian command structures, carrying weapons, conducting missions, and potentially accessing NATO opposition tactics. The U.S. intelligence community cautiously labeled them mercenaries, distancing them from direct CCP control. But that's diplomatic varnish. In reality, these fighters signal strategic coordination, because mercenaries don't show up on Russia's side of the battlefield by accident. They need recruitment pipelines, visas, transport, and permission. And permission in this case likely comes with a red flag and 5 golden stars. This single flashpoint, 2 Chinese fighters in Donbas, turns the narrative. It challenges the West's assumption that Beijing is hedging. It raises the terrifying possibility that China and Russia are testing a wartime alliance in real time, while Washington's focus remains trained on trade balances and container ships. It also throws Trump's tariffs into a darker light. Because if China is arming, training, or testing its soldiers in a live war zone backed by Russia, then we are no longer operating under economic rivalry. We have crossed into ideological escalation, Cold War 2.0. Except this time, the lines are being drawn not in Berlin, but in Bakhmut. And this shift doesn't just have implications on the battlefield. It sends ripples through military logistics, strategic alliances, and yes, ports. Just as Washington was beginning to digest the stunning revelation of Chinese fighters in Ukraine, pulling the mask off Beijing's so-called neutrality, another strategic twist arrived, this time from the Mediterranean coast. And it wasn't on a battlefield. It was at a port, one of the most controversial in the world. Haifa Bay, Israel, China's Shanghai International Port Group, SIPG, a state-owned entity, already co-managed this port alongside India's Adani Group under a 2014 contract. But now, through a low-profile regulation labeled as a logistics reform, China has quietly doubled its operational control, from 2 platforms to 4. That may sound like a technical upgrade, but in geopolitical terms, it's an infrastructure land grab with enormous military implications. Why? Because just a mile away from those new Chinese-controlled docks lies Israel's most sensitive naval base, where U.S. warships often anchor and Israeli submarines equipped with nuclear capability reside. The very same Trump administration that slapped tariffs on Beijing in 2019 warned Israel in serious terms that these Chinese-built cranes could be espionage tools in disguise. Equipped with surveillance gear, signal interceptors, and data transmission systems, they could monitor U.S. naval operations, download logistical blueprints, or track Allied defense activity. But the warnings were not heeded. With Trump's tariffs now fully in effect, and his administration doubling down on its economic crusade, Beijing has struck back, not with missiles, but with maritime real estate. What better way to show you haven't been cornered than to build a strategic outpost right next to your enemy's front yard? Before we continue further, tell us, are you enjoying the video? If yes, please like and share the video, and subscribe to our channel to watch more videos on the latest news stories on geopolitics, economics, and current affairs impacting your lives. For China, this isn't just a logistical upgrade. It's revenge with a shipping manifest. It's a flex of quiet dominance in a space where America used to hold monopoly influence. And the message is deliberate. While the U.S. obsesses over tariffs, China is taking physical ground. But why Israel? And why now? Well, the move reflects Beijing's long game. With the Middle East embroiled in overlapping crises like Iranian proxies, Red Sea instability, and U.S. disengagement, China is buying footholds wherever U.S. attention is scattered. Israel, for its part, is treading a tightrope. It claims it's locked into the 2014 agreement and insists it's imposing draconian oversight on Chinese activities. But facts on the ground say otherwise. 4 platforms 1 mile from U.S. submarines, Chinese-operated. Worse yet, this comes at a time when China is deepening ties with Israel's enemies, from supplying components to Iran to cozying up to Hamas's financial backers in the Gulf. It's playing both sides of the chessboard, which brings us to the heart of the issue. Trade war alone cannot contain China anymore. The battlefield has spilled beyond spreadsheets and shipping rates. It's reached docks, borders, and military flashpoints. And that's exactly why Trump's next move would escalate things further than anyone expected. He didn't just retaliate with more tariffs, he tripled down. When Trump signed his signature on the latest round of tariffs, it wasn't just a policy decision. It was an escalation, one that would push the U.S.-China tensions into new terrain. The numbers were eye-watering: 145% tariffs on textiles, steel, electronics, vehicles, and pharmaceuticals. But even that wasn't enough for some in Trump's circle. They floated a nuclear option: 400% tariffs if Beijing didn't start playing fair. Trump's team spun it as a path to economic victory, insisting they could force Beijing to its knees. But if Washington expected panic from Beijing, they got something else: calculated resistance. China didn't shout, it didn't threaten, it acted. First, it filed a formal complaint at the World Trade Organization, triggering a bureaucratic response Washington could neither dismiss nor dominate. Then it issued a travel risk advisory, warning Chinese citizens about rising hostility in the U.S. But that was just the diplomatic warm-up. China proceeded to blacklist 6 major U.S. tech firms, freezing their access to crucial Asian markets. Simultaneously, it announced export restrictions on rare earth elements, the minerals essential to America's green energy and defense sectors. It was a move so targeted, it rattled Pentagon procurement officers. Then came the real trigger, one no one in Washington expected. Beijing began offloading the U.S. treasuries. By selling U.S. government debt at scale, China weakens the dollar's global dominance. It shakes the very core of America's borrowing power. For decades, the dollar's role as the world's reserve currency gave Washington unparalleled strength. Now Beijing was poking that pillar, testing its integrity. Even more alarmingly, China's state banks signaled preparations for long-term financial decoupling. The CCP wasn't looking for a quick win. It was laying the foundations for an economic future where America's shadow didn't reach. Trump lit the match, but China had already drenched the floor in fuel. What followed next was not a panic. It was a controlled demolition. As tariff battles scorched headlines and corporate balance sheets, China quietly shifted its focus to something far more dangerous: the currency war. Within a week, the yuan hit its lowest value in 2 years. But instead of scrambling to prop it up, Beijing chose a counterintuitive path: weaponize the fall. A weak yuan makes Chinese exports cheaper, blunting the impact of Trump's aggressive tariffs. It turns American punishment into a competitive edge. U.S. consumers might pay more, but global buyers? They keep choosing China. Inside China, the central banks responded with swift liquidity injections, flooding domestic markets with capital to cushion volatility. Unlike Western democracies, Beijing doesn't have to wait for approval or argue in Congress. It acts immediately. Meanwhile, the U.S. dollar surged to an 18-year high, triggering a chain reaction. Emerging markets tied to the yuan began wobbling. Chinese and Hong Kong stock markets crashed to their lowest points in years. It looked like a Chinese defeat. But that's where most analysts got it wrong. This was not a collapse. It was a controlled demolition. Beijing has done this before. Burn the village to save the kingdom. Crush speculative bubbles, purge bad debt, and consolidate power within the state apparatus. Every loss was a setup for the next move. While Western economists gasped at falling indexes, China focused on long-term survival. And through it all, one message came through clearly: you want war? We will outlast you. And if that wasn't clear enough, Beijing made one more move to solidify its endgame strategy. It began seeking new settlement systems outside the dollar. With help from Russia, the UAE, and even some African BRICS allies, China pushed for alternative trade networks, hedging its future from SWIFT, from Wall Street, from Washington. This wasn't a tantrum, it was an evolution. And when the dust settles, the country that survives the currency war won't just win the trade war, it will own the future. What do you think? Has China given up the cool attitude and is ready to risk everything to fight tariffs? Do you feel that's a red line for China, for which it has prepared to go to all extremes? In the comments section below, share your thoughts on who you think is more equipped to win the trade war: China or the United States? Do you want to watch more videos like this one? If yes, subscribe to our channel and press the bell icon next to it. We bring the latest news stories on geopolitics, economics, changing world order, and current affairs. Things you need to stay informed. Thanks for watching, and until the next video, stay tuned.